It is that time, folks. Time to talk some Notre Dame football on Wednesday night here at the Voice of College Football. Got Brian Driscoll here, of course. This is the guy that needs to show up. Otherwise, we don't have a show. So I can only talk Notre Dame for so long, and I don't think any of you want to hear it. So we got Brian here from, of course, Irish Breakdown. That is the place to check out every day for your Notre Dame football talk. Brian, how you doing tonight?
I am doing well, Mark, doing well. Sorry for being so late, but hey, better late than never, right?
Absolutely. Gather around, folks. Brian and I are going to kick it around for a while. All right. I'm going to take us outside the season, per se, to the recruiting front and the big pickup, the flip from Clemson, of course, the quarterback by way of Connecticut high school football, and that's Blake Hebert. Just your impressions of his abilities based on what you've seen.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I found a video that we did back in, I think it was like June of 2023 when he was kind of on that top prospects board for Notre Dame very early on, and just watched him even back as a sophomore. He's a big armed kid. He's kind of got that prototype quarterback size, 6'2.5", 6'3", 215. Quick release, can throw off. He can change the arm angles a little bit, a lot like modern quarterbacks, but he's a big armed over the top kid. Good athlete, not a guy that's going to, run for 700 yards, be like a Riley Leonard type of guy, but can run the read zone, can move the chains with his legs, can make some big plays if you give him a crease. And, just a smart kid, leader. Everyone that I've talked to about him says he's got great leadership skills and all those type of things. So I think it's a really good pickup. And you don't see Notre Dame flip kids from Clemson very often. So I think that was a big part of this too, was being able to go against a team that you're competing with for playoff spots on a yearly basis, and you're able to flip a quarterback that's been committed to them for he's been committed to Clemson longer than Deuce Knight was committed to Notre Dame. And he was a guy that they liked a lot very early on, but he was at the time all set on Clemson, and Notre Dame was able to change that a little bit.
So it's a 5-1 season right now. And aside from the one outlier, that's the obvious as a 29-point favorite, I don't think that there's any super, super positive spin given to this season or super negative spin. Notre Dame's about where you would expect them to be at this point. Certainly they could be undefeated, but there were some possible losses on the schedule to this point. And again, just about position where you would expect, around number 10 in the nation. So do you think what has transpired this season has had any impact one way or the other on the overall recruiting situation?
No, not yet. I look, kids aren't going to look at things the way we do as fans, right? I've said this to Notre Dame fans for years. Every time they lose a game, who's going to decommit? And I'm like, nobody probably. Because recruits don't look at this like we do. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that like I've been a Notre Dame fan 40 years, you've been a fan of your favorite team for how long? I don't know if that's out there, so I didn't want to say it, and we look at things sort of, just in a way that is just more emotional because it's our team. And most of these prospects don't make these decisions, don't look at these things the same way. Plus, when things don't go well, a lot of times recruits are going to look at it and say, well, wait till I get there. Or this wouldn't have happened if I was there. Or we're not going to let that happen when we get there. And that's why you don't often see kids decommit because of a bad game. Now, if Notre Dame's 2-4 right now or 3-3 right now, then we may be having a different conversation. But, just the one loss is not going to negate what we've seen with the Louisville win, with the Texas A&M win, and the fact that, as you mentioned, this is a top 10 football team. And if Notre Dame was 6-0 right now and had won every game by 40, Deuce Knight still decommits. That had nothing to do with it because he flipped to a team that's 2-4. You know what I mean? So it wasn't about wins and losses. It was about, other things, because it's not about education. It's not about winning and losing. It's about other things, because otherwise he'd have picked someone other than Auburn. So that's kind of where that's at. So no, it hasn't had a dramatic effect now. Now, how the season ends, if they, struggle down the stretch, that could have a bit of a bigger impact. But as of now, recruiting is still rolling along. And they like I said, they flipped 2 kids on Monday because they also flipped an offensive lineman from Iowa.
Oh, so, okay. Yeah. Who is that?
Cameron Herron. It's a kid from Indianapolis that Notre Dame had him camped this summer. Decided not to take him at the time because they only wanted to take 3 offensive linemen, and they already had 3 kids in the class they liked a lot. And he's having a really good senior season, and they decided they wanted a center prospect in the class, so they went out and got him. And I know he's ranked in the top 300 by On3, and he's ranked in the top 300 by 247 Sports, although I don't put a lot of stock in, to be honest with you, 247 Sports rankings. But, he's a quality prospect, center kid, and he fits a need, of kind of what they're looking for.
Yeah. So while we're on the topic, we'll just stay right there. Is there anybody on this commitment list to date, other than the obvious at the top of the board? Anybody that really stands out to you that you think, hey, I don't think they're rated correctly. I really like that they went out and got this guy that's under the radar.
Well, if you're going to use 247's rankings, there's a lot of guys that they have ranked incredibly wrong. No, but I mean, when I look at it, I see some kids that right now I'm comfortable with their ranking, but I think they're higher upside kids. Like a guy like Ethan Long, for example. I'm comfortable where his ranking is right now because I think he's still a tall, skinny kid that's still learning the game. But he's one of those kids that has a very high upside, a kid that I think has a chance to, down the road, be a really good player. A guy like Gordy Solstead that you look at right there. I'm totally comfortable with his 3-star ranking, but he's one of those guys. He's 6'6", he's 250 pounds. He's bigger than that listed right there. His dad played, I think Miami of Ohio was a 300-plus pound offensive lineman that played in the NFL a little bit, so he's got some good DNA. So he's another kid. They did 247. One of the few things they got right was bumping Elijah Burris up to a 4-star. He's been a 4-star on the Irish Breakdown board since he committed to Notre Dame. He's having a heck of a senior season. So, it's one of those classes that you look at, Mark, and some of the kids they got a very strange ranking. And I like Dallas Golden. Look, I've evaluated a lot of defensive backs to come to Notre Dame over the years, and that kid's a top 50 football player if I've ever seen one. He's up on the list quite a bit. And he's a guy that to me, that's a top 50 football player. And I don't really care how anybody ranks him. And that's down. He was ranked 70th on 247 in their last update. And they, for some reason that I'm sure they have a reason for it, that's a bad one, has dropped like 90 spots in the last ranking, despite being one of the best players in the state of Florida. That kid gives me Benjamin Morrison vibes with bigger body and more athleticism coming out of high school. And that was another kid that was ranked. Nobody had him in their top 300 coming out of high school, and he's turned out to be pretty good. So I love this secondary class. It's an elite secondary class. And, Jadon Blair is a kid right there. That's another guy that I graded out as a top 50 football player. James Flanagan's dad played in Notre Dame. He was on that 1993 defensive line with Bryant Young. That is kind of interesting. You look at that 93 team and, those two stud interior guys that Notre Dame had on that great defensive line. Their kids are both going to be at Notre Dame next season. Obviously, Bryant Young's son is already at Notre Dame, and Jim Flanagan's son will be there soon. And Jerome Bettis' son will be on the team next year. Plexico Burris' son will be on the team next year. So it's a lot of former NFL players like to send their kids to Notre Dame, for a lot of different reasons. But and I really like that offensive line class that they have coming in next year as well. And Cam Herron's a solid addition to that group. But I really like this class. They just got to finish, right? That's the thing, is they got to finish. They need one more receiver. They're on a kid from Texas named Jalen Cooper, who I like a lot, currently committed to SMU. I think On3 has him as a borderline top 100 player. They're also trying to finish with Madden Faramo, who's a kid from California, from Gardena, California, very talented linebacker. Reminds me a lot of Kingston Viliama Asa. So the finish is going to be the key, right? Keep the kids you have in the class and then finish strong at wide receiver and linebacker. And they're going to have a top 100 player from Florida visiting for the Florida State game who's currently committed to Florida, a kid from Tallahassee. So that's a fun one. He's from Tallahassee, committed to Florida, is going to visit Notre Dame for their game against Florida State on November 9th. So that's another kid they're trying to finish with, along with obviously Nathaniel Usu-Boateng, whose brother Jeremiah played at Notre Dame.
Well, I guess considering where Florida State recruiting stands right now, at least he didn't commit to Florida State and then decommit.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that happening with the Seminoles right now. There's no doubt about it. Like, that's the kind of season that can cause your class to fall apart, Mark, right? Like getting upset one Saturday in early September against Northern Illinois, which was a bad loss. There's no spinning that loss. It's just that prospects don't emotionally react to those things the way we do as fans, which is why you don't see those big jumps. Now, had they followed it up with a loss to Purdue and maybe a loss to Louisville and some things like that, then sure, we might see a couple kids jump out of there because they don't see Notre Dame as being a championship program. But I said, more often than not, it takes a really bad falling apart type season for kids to leave because of what's happening on the field.
Folks, we appreciate you being here. And again, we appreciate Brian showing up for us on a weekly basis to talk Notre Dame football. Irish Breakdown is the place to catch Brian and the rest of the crew on a regular basis every day, 1 p.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday with Brian and all the other content that they provide there at Irish Breakdown. Please leave your comments and questions there in the chat. Of course, we're going to talk some Georgia Tech here in just a second. But comments and questions are welcome. We appreciate the super chat contributions as well. And by the way, Brian, you referred to my fandom. So for a long time, I kept that under wraps, and I had a lot of fun with that because I felt pretty good about my commentary and analysis because people had no idea. They could not guess who I rooted for. And then it came out, whatever, 3 or 4 years ago, I would say. So considering that team, Ohio State, is in the middle of any type of elite type conversation, I don't like my position. I would love to be rooting for Kansas State or Purdue or somebody so I could just remove myself and just analyze it. But to filter out the bias and to have people believe that I'm filtering out the bias is a tough one to hurdle. But again, I take some satisfaction that before people found out, or people that jump on board now and before they find out, seem to have a difficult time determining that. So we do the best we can.
I don't hide it. I just say, look, I'm going to, I cover Notre Dame. What am I going to do? Right.
But, of course.
I think one thing that's helped our channel grow and why we have, we have LSU fans in our channel. We used to have an Alabama fan. He hasn't been in there in a while. Michigan fans, we have some Ohio State fans in there, is because they may not always agree with us, but I do think most people believe we give honest analysis. Whether we're right or wrong, we're going to tell you exactly how I feel. And we're not afraid to be critical of Notre Dame if it's warranted, and praise other teams if it's warranted. I actually got some heat this past week, all in good fun heat, right? Not real heat, but my wife was a little upset with me about it. Vince was a little upset with me about it. Because I am the only member of the IB staff in our weekly predictions that picked LSU to win last week. Like, how could you pick LSU? And I was like, because I don't think Ole Miss can go on the road and beat LSU in Tiger Stadium at night. That's why. And my feelings about Brian Kelly are irrelevant, right? I mean, I dislike Brian Kelly. Doesn't mean I think his team's going to go 0-12 or I'm going to pick him to go 0-12. So I thought that was a game they're going to win. And I'll be honest with you, they didn't win the way I thought they would. I thought it was going to be more Ole Miss choking the game away because they can't play in that environment. But it was a heck of a football game. It really was a heck of a back-and-forth football game. And I think LSU had one lead in the game, and it was when it mattered most.
On the last play of the game,
right? It's the only time it matters is that you lead when that clock hits 0. That's the only time it really matters.
And Ole Miss did not choke it away. They did leave a ton of points on the field in the first half. Lane Kiffin hates kicking, place kicking, but he sent one out there on a 4th and goal, and then missed the field goal, and then he, of course, kicked himself in the rear end and said, next time we're down there. But then he went for it, and they didn't block the edge rusher who got around and stopped the 4th and goal play. But that was a heck of a ball game. But, I'm going to go to you brought the name up, and this is just a topic that keeps giving and giving and giving. You brought up Brian Kelly. So this hit me. Got to ask this question. At one point, since you don't approve of Brian Kelly's tenure at Notre Dame, but I think you have given it.
He did a very good job at Notre Dame.
Okay,
I don't think you can. I don't think you can deny that he did a good job at Notre Dame.
Yeah,
he took him to the national title game. He had him in the playoff twice. You can't deny he did a good job, but he was not an elite coach. He did not do the things I felt necessary to maximize his potential at Notre Dame. But when you win 10+ games as many times as you can't say that I don't approve of the success. I don't like how he always went about his business. I don't think how he conducted himself is the right way, but the results were still pretty good. Jack Swarbrick helped by handing him a really relatively manageable schedule his last several years. But I just make sure clear. I dislike Brian Kelly as a person. I think his results are a tad overrated. People act like he's an elite coach. He's not. His record against top 25 teams, I believe he's sub 500 for his career at Notre Dame. So he's not in the same conversation as Lou Holtz and these people. He won the longevity award. He was there the longest, and they played more games now than they did back when those other guys were coaching. But he still did a good job at Notre Dame. I don't want to make it seem like he was garbage and they won 100 games in spite of Brian Kelly. No, because we saw what happened with the bad coaches before him. They didn't win. You know what I mean? So I just want to make sure that that's clear. It's my dislike for him is more as a person and then the way he went about things more so than I think he was a bad football coach.
So I'll have to rephrase my question. There was not a time in his tenure that you thought, okay, don't like him, don't want him here.
At the end, I thought it was time to move on. I do. Like, it was like, look, he has taken this program as far as he can take it. He's not willing to do the things needed to go beyond. He's just kind of explaining away why they are where they are. Because you get to a point in time and say, hey, listen, this coach has done a great job here. Mac Brown's probably the greatest football coach that North Carolina's ever had. I think we can all agree that, it's probably time for Coach Brown to retire and take his Hall of Fame, get himself into the Hall of Fame and we can respect the job that he did. That happens to every coach, right? I mean, there's a time in every great coach's career where you realize, like, look, I've gone as far as I can go here. And that's where Brian Kelly was. And the thing that bothered me, Mark, was he was not, like I said, there were things he could have done differently that he didn't do, recruiting wise, and just like I had to have Notre Dame players captains would tell me, he'd meet us in December or January when we get back from winter break, and then we'd barely see him until spring ball started. Your head football coach in Notre Dame, like Matt Balis was running that program in a lot of instances, and it was those things, not working hard, and you can't recruit at Notre Dame. We got to shop down to different aisle. Well, Marcus Freeman has proven that that's bull crap, and he started doing that before NIL became a thing. And it was just stuff like that that really bothered me. Like, he would talk down Notre Dame and the expectations for Notre Dame. Like, this is the best we can do. No, that's the best you're willing to do, was always my problem. And that was kind of where I was at, Mark. I had just kind of had enough of him talking down the program. And then when you're just not someone who I find to be a rather honest and person with a lot of integrity, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done. But that doesn't take away all the wins he did have. The fact that he did get to the playoff twice and he did get them to the BCS title game. You don't do that if you're at Notre Dame, if you're not a good football coach.
Absolutely. And I was listening to Mike Denbrock's comments after one of the more recent practices. I'm losing track of dates. It might have been today's practice. And I noticed that Marcus Freeman has been included on a watch list for Coach of the Year. Now, I don't know what publication or that was the official AP, if they have a watch list. I don't know if they include
some
40
Bryant
coaches
Award
or something like
along those lines. I'm not.
Yeah, it must have been that.
Something like that, yeah.
So I never bought into coaches awards, the Coach of the Year. I couldn't tell you who's won a Coach of the Year, and I would probably dispute most of them.
I like Coach of the Year awards if they're done correctly. Because you could go find, you could say a year where Lance Leopold goes 9-3 at Kansas is better than any job anybody else did anywhere. Yeah, but this guy's in the national championship game. Yeah, he's at Alabama. He should be in the national title game. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Kurt Signetti going 6-0 at Indiana is a whole lot more impressive than Kirby Smart going 5-1 at Georgia. You know what I mean? And if Indiana ends up only going 9-3, that's still more impressive than Notre Dame going 10-2 or Georgia going 10-2 and. That's kind of how it's turned into, right? It's these big name, coaches. It's like the Heisman Trophy Award. That rarely goes to the actual best player in college football. Like, very rarely. You get the occasional times like a Charles Woodson or a, Devontae Smith is just so dominant, but that rarely goes to the actual best player in college football. And Coach of the Year awards are kind of like that. Who's the best coach at one of the best schools? It very rarely goes to the guy that I think did the best job, which to me is relative to, the expectations of your program, bouncing back from the previous year, things like that. So, that's my issue with it. But I think in general, I kind of like the idea, especially as a former coach. You'd like having stuff like that because that's going to help you renegotiate your contract next. Hey, I won Coach of the Year last year. Pay me more money.
Yeah, whatever it takes to boost up the resume. Absolutely. Well, the resume is going to get slightly boosted by a win over a 5-2 Georgia Tech team. That let's see, they get a loss against Louisville. They lost to Syracuse, yeah, by a field goal. That's right. And of course, started the season against Florida State. Haynes King at quarterback. And of course, Brent Key's done a nice job, especially it's always good to do a decent job after a horrible job by the previous coach. And that would be, of course, Jeff Collins. So what have you seen out of Georgia Tech?
Well, they take on the personality of their offensive line, of their head coach. He's a former offensive line coach, big guy, kind of cocky, little arrogant. And I mean that in a good way. His team plays like that. They think they're better than they are, which is a good thing. That's a compliment because they're not going to be afraid of Notre Dame. They weren't afraid of Florida State. If they had to play Georgia tomorrow, they're not going to be afraid of Georgia. It doesn't mean they're going to win, but they're going to play with confidence. And they're also what you'd expect from a former offensive lineman is they're very physical in the trenches. They're a tough team. They compete. They're good at running the ball. They're good at stopping the run. I mean, they're very much an old school team like that. And, the sign of a good football coach, in my opinion, Mark, is being able to show growth and development and say, hey, here's where we're not as good. And let's get better at it. You look at those numbers right there for Haynes King, 8 touchdowns, 1 interception. Do you remember how many interceptions Mark Haynes King threw last year?
I believe it was 16.
16. He's got, I think, 3 total turnovers this year in 7 games. And they've played a challenging schedule. They've played Florida State. They've played Syracuse. They've played Louisville. They've played Notre Dame. They've played Duke. They've played North Carolina. They don't have a bunch of games like Ohio State against a bunch of MAC teams and, some middle-of-the-road Big Ten teams. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. They've actually played, quality teams week after
week. They played Oregon, though. I don't think Oregon's on.
They played one good team. What happened in that game? What happened in that game? No, I'm just giving you a hard time on that one. But in all seriousness, they've played a quality schedule, right? He hasn't done this a bunch against FCS teams, Elon and Furman and teams like that. He's played good football. I mean, and the only reason they were even in the Louisville game is because he threw for over 300 yards and ran well in that game as well. So to watch the growth he's made from year 1 to year 2, that doesn't happen without hard work from Haynes King, but also without good coaching. You're also seeing Jamal Haynes start to really heat up. He was a 1,000-yard runner last year. Didn't start off well, Mark. I don't think he got to 100 yards in each of his first 5 games. I think he's over 300 the last 2 games. I think he's gone over 300 the last 2 games. And I'm sure you saw that walk-off 68-yard touchdown run he had against North Carolina this weekend, which was a heck of a play. But he's a very talented back. Their offensive line isn't super talented. There's no Joe Alt type guy on their line, but they're veteran, they're big, they're physical. They've allowed 1 sack this entire season. 1 sack. And if you watch them play, it's not a bunch of like Notre Dame where, Riley Leonard's only been sacked, I think 5 or 6 times, but it's because he's made a lot of guys miss of what should have been sacks. I mean, they do a great job of protecting him, and he's making good decisions. They've got talented receivers, and Eric Singleton and Malik Rutherford are good football players. So this is a quality football team. Their front 7 is not super dynamic on defense, but they're physical, they're smart. Tyler Santucci's a Mike Elko disciple, really quality young football coach. He was actually I think an analyst or GA at Notre Dame in 2017 under Mike Elko. Came with Mike Elko from Wake Forest to Notre Dame, then followed Mike Elko to Texas A&M, and then followed Mike Elko to Duke, and now he's now a defensive coordinator at Georgia Tech and has taken what a defense that was really bad last year and made them competitive. They're still not an elite defense by any stretch. They're not a great defense, but they're much more competitive. They've dropped their scoring average by about 8 points since last year. Their yards average has gone way down. Their yards allowed per play has gone way down. They're a lot more competitive football team, and it all centers around their ability to be very big and physical in the front 7, and they make life really hard on teams trying to run the football. I think North Carolina is the only team that's really had much success running the football on them this season so far.
And that guy, Omarion Hampton, is toting the rock for them. So
he's pretty good.
That's understandable. Yeah, he is a good one. Do you like that? For all the conversations we've had, I don't know that we've really attacked this topic. Do you like the Notre Dame connection to the ACC and the mandated games based on that contract?
I'm fine with it. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense for them in basketball and other sports. And, I'm fine playing the ACC. The thing that you have to look at is why the ACC, and a big reason why is because Notre Dame has a desire to expand its brand into that part of the country. When you look at from Boston all the way down the East Coast into Georgia, that's an area where Notre Dame wants to expand its brand. And so now every year, Notre Dame is going into North Carolina. I think this is the first year in a while that Notre Dame doesn't play a road game in either Virginia or North Carolina. They, because I every year I see my family every year in the fall, because I'll fly to Virginia Beach or Norfolk, Virginia, and see my family, and then drive to the game either at Raleigh or Durham or Chapel Hill or Charlottesville or Blacksburg or wherever, and that's getting their foothold. Look at their roster. They're starting to add a lot more of those Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia kids to the roster, which is having a big impact. And, Bryce Young, the freshman from, obviously his dad was there, but they got him, and they got a teammate of his, Micah Gilbert from North Carolina, which is a big pickup. So Sam Pendleton, they're starting left guards from North Carolina. So they're starting to have more of that impact on, and that's what they wanted. Like we could talk about football reasons for the Big Ten and all those other type of things, but as you know, that's not how Notre Dame views it. It's not what league is best for us from a pure football standpoint, but it's what league is best for us to help us continue to build up our brand. That's going to help us in a lot of other ways beyond just making the most sense from a travel or a league standpoint. So I'm a big fan of it. I would make some tweaks I would have liked to have made some tweaks to it. I would like to have said, hey, we're going to have every year, we're going to play one of BC or Pitt every year, and maybe rotate a home and home with Pitt, then a home and home with BC, then a home. There'd be some games like that against some of your traditional rivals that I would have on there a little bit more frequently. You always have, or maybe you could say, we're always going to have a Northeastern game. So we're always going to play Pitt, BC, or Syracuse every year, and rotate it, that type of thing. I would maybe do some of those tweaks. But outside of that, I think it's been great. I mean, Notre Dame and Clemson have developed a nice little rivalry here, a respectful rivalry because of this. If it wasn't for this, the only time they would have played is 2018 in the playoff. But they had a great game in 2015. Then obviously Notre Dame beats them in an epic game in 2020. Clemson gets payback in the ACC title game. Notre Dame has the big win over 2020 in 2022. Clemson gets the rematch last year and gets payback last year. It's turned into a heck of a little rivalry that I appreciate and enjoy. And you get to see them play teams that I didn't grow up watching them play. And I kind of enjoyed it. I just would have liked to maybe tweaked it a little bit differently than the way they have. But overall, I think it's good for them. The thing that's hurt Notre Dame's schedule in recent years, Mark, is just USC being down. If USC was better and Stanford was what they were early in the decade, the schedule would look a lot different. And they've also caught some bad breaks where, we've talked about this before. In 2021, they kicked the season off at Florida State. Well, who knew that Florida State was going to be terrible that year? When it was first set up in 2013, boy, that 2021 schedule, well, that's going to be rough. But that's just kind of how it plays out a little bit.
Appreciate y'all being here at the Voice of College Football, talking Notre Dame. Of course, the Irish take on Georgia Tech. They're playing at the NFL Stadium, Mercedes-Benz, I believe is what they call that, 3:30 Eastern on ESPN. So Stanford's, of course, already on the schedule, of course. Then you got Cal and SMU. Are they being moved into that rotation? I assume that they will.
They haven't tweaked the schedule yet. I don't know what they're going to do. I would imagine that Notre Dame's going to wait until the ESPN makes their decision with the contract in a year. Are they going to keep the ACC contract or use that loophole to get out of it? And I don't think it really makes a lot of sense to tweak your schedule if you don't know if the league is going to survive beyond the next couple of years. But I would imagine they'll do some kind of tweaking to it. And I just don't know what that's going to look like. Because Stanford's off Notre Dame's schedule after this year. They have not re-signed their contract with Stanford. And I would imagine part of that is going to be the ACC. And somebody in our show today in the chat made a great point. Like the ideal, maybe it was on our message board, but the ideal situation for Notre Dame is to play Stanford in the ACC. And then you get them, every 4 or 5, in a decade, you get them 4 or 5, maybe 6 times, but you don't have to play them every single year like you have been. And it used to be beneficial for Notre Dame to do that. It's not anymore.
One thing about, and we had our scheduling conversation last week, is that there are matchups that I can come up with rather easily. Michigan LSU would be one that it irked me. This would have been in the 2018 postseason where Michigan had played Florida in the 2015 Citrus Bowl. They played them in the season opening game in 2017, and the powers that be put them together for a third time in a year and a half to 2.5 years in a bowl game while LSU was playing UCF in the, let's see, that was Joe Burrow's last game before the big breakout year for the national championship the year after. And I'm sitting there thinking, Michigan and LSU have never played in the history of those two programs. UCF and Florida could be playing a bowl game with UCF as, the big underdog, gets a shot at Florida. Had maybe never played them to that point, or it was extremely rare. Can't we have some type of system where people step in that have some knowledge of what's going on? And for Notre Dame, it's difficult to find an opponent that they haven't played because they have certainly sought those games outside of their framework of, the games that they always play. They've gone out and scheduled those games. But I'm coming up with one. Oregon. Has Notre Dame ever played Oregon? I don't believe so. They have.
They're 1-0-1. Yeah, they played them. I think it was in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, the last time they played was 1982. They tied in Eugene, and then Notre Dame beat them in 1976 in South Bend.
Jerry Faust.
No, 76 would have been Dan Devine.
Well, yeah, the 80, the tie game. Yeah. Dan Devine, of course, was there through 80, correct?
But yeah, because Faust was 85, 84, 83, 82, 81. So Devine's last year would have been 80,
Yeah. Okay. But in terms of, the Oregon program that we think about is being Oregon.
Right. Like Oregon State, they've played 3 times, but it's only ever been bowl games.
Yep.
They've only ever played Florida once, and that was in a bowl game.
Sure.
That was the
Sugar.
So I mean, the Sugar Bowl where they beat that Shane Matthews led team. So I'm looking at this. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Notre Dame's only played 12 of the 16 SEC teams, for example. They've never played Mississippi State.
Okay.
They've never played Kentucky.
Okay.
Which I've always found surprising since the states,
sure,
partner each other. I'm trying to think of they've played Missouri, obviously. I'm trying to think of the other 2 that they haven't played.
I would guess.
Yeah, they've played Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas. They've never played. That will change next year.
Okay.
They've never played Arkansas, and then there's one other that I can't remember off the top of my head that they've never played.
When did they play Auburn?
Auburn. Never played Auburn. That's the other one. Yeah. They played Vandy 3 times, Florida once, South Carolina 5 times, Oklahoma 10 times, Texas 12 times, A&M 6 times, Bama 8 times, LSU 12 times, Tennessee 8, Ole Miss twice, Missouri 4 times, and Georgia 3 times.
Didn't Ole Miss upset them when Notre Dame still came back to win the national championship?
Yeah, that was, I believe, the 77 season.
Yes,
77. They went down and played in Jackson, Mississippi, and Ole Miss beat them. And then they played again in 85, and Notre Dame beat them convincingly. But yes, yep. Good call.
Very interesting. Yep. All right, folks. I do appreciate you all being here at the Voice of College Football, and keep in mind that Brian and I get together every week to talk Notre Dame and talk the national scene. So before we wrap it up, is there anything on the slate? I guess the obvious choice would be Georgia, Texas, in terms of seeing how they size up. Bama, Tennessee is also huge in the Big Ten. So I'll go, what game, if you could only see one game this week, what would that be? And then I'll give you an under the radar selection.
Okay. Mine would be there's a game that impacts Notre Dame in multiple ways, and that's Miami at Louisville. So obviously Miami's currently ranked ahead of Notre Dame. So this would be a team that Notre Dame would have a chance of jumping at some point in time. But then, of course, if Louisville does upset Miami, that also bolsters Notre Dame's strength of schedule because Notre Dame beat Louisville. So that's the big one for me. If you're going to look non-Notre Dame related, that LSU-Arkansas game is something I got my eye on. LSU's beaten by Arkansas by 3 points in each of their last 2 games. They won with a walk-off field goal last year and only beat them by 3 points 2 years ago in a game where Arkansas basically they were down to their third-string quarterback for most of the game.
I remember that.
That's
well.
another one that I have an eye on because that's going to be a very interesting game. And Arkansas is playing with a lot of confidence right now. Almost beat A&M, beat Tennessee. They're playing with a lot of confidence right now.
Yes, they are. They have been a nice team to watch. They could easily be undefeated right now. And if I recall that game in Fayetteville 2 years ago that you allude to, Harold Perkins kind of took over the game in terms of just being everywhere, batting passes in the air every other play, and he is not on the field for this LSU team.
Yep.
All right, Brian.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for being here. And everybody, again, Irish Breakdown is your stop each and every day. Enjoy the Georgia Tech game.
That last question from DMND13 is something we should discuss one of these days.
Okay.
What would the ideal Notre Dame schedule look like? That's a nice little fun bye-week topic or maybe off-season topic.
Oh, absolutely it is. Yes, we should make a list of those.
Yeah. Yep, that'd be fun.
Yeah. I'm going to go with a heavy dose of the old Big Ten guard.
Shocker.
Well, I grew up watching Notre Dame, Michigan State, and Purdue.
In all seriousness, I have said Michigan State should absolutely be back on the schedule in some capacity. Absolutely. And they are going to be back on. Purdue's on for the next 6 years. I think Michigan State will be on here in the next couple of years. So yeah, that's a team that if you said you have to pick one Big Ten team that you're going to play every year, who would it be? I'd say Michigan State and wouldn't even think twice about it.
Okay. Now, I am certainly on record as saying that, forgive me, folks, college football fans are generally knuckleheads, and I don't really value their opinion by and large.
Ouch.
But if we did take a poll, you know who would win that by far.
Michigan.
Sure.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, no question. But as you know me, Mark, I don't really care what other people think. If I believe in something, I'm going to be convicted in it, and I'm going to hold my ground on it. But that's a much longer rivalry. They're not the team that blocked Notre Dame from joining the Big Ten twice, So yeah, it's another topic for another day.
Absolutely. All right, Brian, appreciate you being here. Have a great rest of your week and enjoy the game on Saturday.
Thanks, Mark.